All right, let's jump right in. We've all heard the story, right? The night Orson Welles scared the pants off America with his War of the Worlds radio play. A tale of mass panic, Martian invaders, total chaos. But what if I told you the most famous part of that story, the part about the nationwide panic, isn't actually true? Yeah, let's get into it. So picture this. It's the morning after Halloween Eve, 1938. You pick up the New York Times, and this is the headline staring back at you. This single headline really set the stage for a story that would be told for, well, the next 80-plus years. A nation thrown into absolute chaos by a radio show. And it wasn't just the New York Times, not by a long shot. Newspapers all across the country ran with this narrative. They painted this really vivid, really dramatic picture of a country just coming unglued, gripped by this wave of mass hysteria, all thanks to a sci-fi story. I mean, the stories they told were just wild. They talked about thousands of people fleeing their homes to escape Martian heat rays, police switchboards supposedly lighting up like Christmas trees. There were even these vague reports of heart attacks and people thinking about ending it all rather than facing down alien invaders. What a terrifying scene, right? It's such a powerful story. It's been told and retold forever. It really speaks to the power of media, and maybe how gullible we can be. But it also begs a really important question. So what happens when we actually look past those screaming headlines? When we dig into the real evidence from that night? Did an entire country really fall for a Halloween prank? The answer, it turns out, is a pretty big no. According to the C.E. Hooper rating service, which was the gold standard for radio ratings back then, only 2% of households they surveyed were even listening to the War of the Worlds. Just 2%. So here's the reality. The audience for Wells's show was tiny. Almost everyone in America was listening to the biggest show in the country, a comedy variety hour with a ventriloquist named Edgar Bergen and his dummy. So this idea of a nationwide panic, well, it just kind of falls apart when you realize almost nobody was even listening.
Okay, so even if there wasn't a mass nationwide panic, the show was incredibly believable to the small number of people who actually heard it, especially anyone who tuned in late. So the question becomes, how did Orson Welles pull it off? How did he make it sound so real?
Let's set the scene a little. Orson Welles was basically a 23-year-old boy genius. His show, The Mercury Theater on the Air, was already famous for doing these really cool, innovative adaptations of classic books. And for their Halloween special, they didn't just want to tell H.G. Wells' story. They wanted to make it feel like it was happening right now. And this is how he did it. It was this brilliant four-step formula. First, he used a format people implicitly trusted, the breaking news report. Second, he had these bulletins interrupt something totally normal and harmless, in this case, some dance music. Third, he built authority with serious-sounding experts, professors and military men. And fourth, the sound design. The on-location sound effects and those moments of just dead air. It all made it feel like a live unfolding catastrophe. And when you actually listen to bits of the script, you can feel that power. The reporting is just frantic and breathless. The reporter on the scene sounds genuinely terrified, which would make the horror feel absolutely 100% real to anyone who missed the introduction that said, hey, this is just a play. And you've got to remember what was going on in the world. It's 1938. The threat of war in Europe, Hitler, the Munich crisis, all of that had just been dominating the news for weeks. People were already used to their radio programs being interrupted with some pretty grim updates. So you have an audience that's already primed to expect the worst. So if the Martians weren't the real story, what was? Well, the answer isn't about an invasion from space. It's about a battle happening right here on Earth, a fight between two huge media industries. You see, in the 1930s, newspapers were the old guard. They were the established, trusted source for information. Radio was the new kid on the block, this disruptive technology that was stealing away their readers and, more importantly, their advertising dollars. The newspaper industry saw radio as this reckless, irresponsible competitor. And this quote from a newspaper trade journal at the time really says it all. The papers saw an opportunity here. They jumped on these scattered reports of a few frightened listeners to paint their rival radio as a dangerous medium that just couldn't be trusted with the news. The panic was the perfect weapon in their war against radio. So this radio lash from the newspapers, that's what created the initial story of a nationwide panic. But it took a couple more things to turn that story into the legend that we know today. You can really see the myth being built in 3 stages. First, you have the broadcast itself. Then, the very next day, you get the sensational headlines basically manufactured by the newspaper industry. And then, a couple years later, the story gets the stamp of academic approval from a Princeton professor's study, a study that, unfortunately, was based on some seriously flawed data.
And here's the fatal flaw in that study. The author, a guy named Hadley Cantrell, made this huge mistake. He basically counted anyone who said they were frightened or disturbed by a really good horror story as being panicked. All of a sudden, being scared by a spooky show on Halloween Eve was rebranded as mass hysteria. Okay, so the evidence is pretty clear that the Great Panic was mostly a myth, hyped up by the media. And yet, here we are, decades later, still talking about it. Why? What is it about this story that gives it so much staying power?
Well, for one, it's just a killer story. Martians, panic, a boy genius, it's got it all. It also kind of confirms this cynical thing we like to believe that other people are easily fooled. Plus, Orson Welles himself was a master showman, and he never really tried to kill the story because, hey, the publicity was fantastic for his career. And, of course, it works as this timeless cautionary tale about the power of new media. And this whole affair really matters because it had real, lasting consequences. The controversy led directly to a specific FCC rule against broadcast hoaxes. This regulation was put in place specifically to stop broadcasters from airing false information about a disaster, making sure that a trusted system like the radio couldn't be used to create that kind of confusion ever again. So in the end, the War of the Worlds story was never really about Martians invading. It was this powerful, almost accidental demonstration of how our most trusted channels of communication can completely shape our reality. It shows just how vulnerable we are when the lines between what's real and what's fake get blurred by the very sources we're taught to believe, leaving us with a question that feels more relevant today than ever.